Hi there, I'm Alessandra Latour, a leadership expert with over 15 years of experience leading teams and developing leadership programs for over 400 leaders. I've had the privilege of designing learning programs for companies ranging from 15 to 5,000 team members, and I've earned a Doctor of Education degree to make sure that all of the programs I develop maximize learning and action. Through the Latour Leadership Academy, I empower emerging and existing leaders to embrace their authentic leadership style, create team synergy, and foster a positive work culture through curated and personalized learning experiences. In this podcast, we'll talk about how leadership can be found in everyday activities and provide practical tips for those who are new to managing or leading a new team. If you're a leader or hoping to be one, by title or not, I'd love to connect, get to know you better, and find out how I can help. You can grab a free resource on my website, latourleadershipacademy.com, and sign up for my weekly email newsletter where we talk about leadership skills, network, and share action-based ways to enhance team collaboration and positive productivity.
This mini-sode is focused on leadership and self-improvement, key areas for anyone looking to lead effectively and grow professionally. Let's get started. So the first question that was asked was, what are some common mistakes new leaders make and how can I avoid them, right? That second piece is key. So I think that there's probably three really common things that I would say most leaders, when they're new or when they're taking on a new team, make. And so the first one would be trying to do everything yourself instead of delegating. So yes, sometimes as a new leader, we want to show what we can do and show our knowledge and show our expertise. But when you delegate, you actually show strength in relying on the people around you, right? So as a leader, you want to be able to rely on the people around you and their expertise and showcase their value, because as a leader, you are supposed to be cultivating other leaders. So instead of doing everything yourself, try delegating. And when you delegate, there's really four reasons we would delegate. One is for weakness. So if it's something that you can't do very well yourself and you know somebody's stronger at it, you might delegate. One is for scale. Let's say you've got so much on your plate and you just don't have time for this task and you need to push it off on somebody else, and that's delegating for scale. Now, that doesn't always feel comfortable, and it sometimes comes too quickly, right? So if you're really busy and you need to move something, you might not give the best directions. You might not give the best support. You might not choose the right person. You're just trying to get rid of this thing, right? So you'll want to be really careful if you're delegating for scale that you are going to the right person. You're giving the right instructions and support, and you're not just throwing something at somebody just to get it off your plate. The third reason is to delegate for visibility. So let's say you have a team member that you want to help grow. You're asking them to do something you know they're going to be successful at because you want other people to see that they can do that, right? So their visibility, not yours, their visibility. And then the last one is delegating for growth. Now, delegating for growth, again, not about you, it's about your team. You're delegating so that somebody else has an opportunity to meet a challenge that will help them grow in their career or their role. So you're picking something that they're likely to be successful at, but they may need some help, and it's probably a bit of a challenge to complete it. So that's when you're looking for the best person to do something, because you know that you want to promote them to the next level, and they'll have to have this skill in order to move forward. So those are really the four ways or four times we delegate. And all of those require that you're picking the right person, the right time. You're managing their workload, right? If you're their leader. You are giving them the information they need and supporting them through that task. So you're not just throwing it at them and running away. Now, the second common mistake new leaders make is failing to communicate effectively or regularly with their team. So regularly, let's address the regularly part first. I suggest that you're having team meetings on a weekly basis, if not more frequent, depending on your workload and depending on your type of work. In addition, I recommend that leaders meet with individuals on their team one-on-one, at least weekly, especially in the beginning when they're either first hired or you're first newly leading. Once you have an established routine, you might suggest, hey, what does it look like if we meet every other week? You could stay with every week, or maybe you realize that you don't fill that meeting time, or you don't have things to help them develop within that meeting time, and you want to bump it back a little bit. I would hesitate to go any less frequent than every other week with your individual team members. Now, if you have a huge team, this might be harder to do, so you might have to work within those constraints. And then I also suggest, to help the communication among the team, is to have your team meet with each other individually, one-on-one. on at least a monthly basis. My recommendation for those meetings is that it's not work-related, that it's more either their professional journey or their personal, whatever they're willing to share personally, how they're doing. You want to foster connections between these team members so that they feel comfortable going to each other for help, to collaborate, etc. And especially if you have a remote team, these one-on-ones between you and your team individually and also between team members are going to help build the trust that you need to get to good, healthy conflict, accountability, decision-making, and celebrating team success. Now, the communicate effectively part. One of the things that I see new leaders doing is, I want to have more meetings because I want to communicate. I want us to get together and know what we're doing. Great, that's wonderful. But if you go into a meeting with no agenda and no idea of what you're going to be talking about, and not just you, if your team members go into a meeting with no agenda, not knowing what they're talking about, probably some of them are thinking, where's my pink slip? But also, a lot of us that, especially, people like me who are very, if the meeting is happening, it better have a really good importance and be relevant to me and timely and productive and efficient, right? So if you have a meeting with no agenda and no idea what you're talking about and people are going into that, they A, can't prepare, and they B, have no idea if this is worth their time. So make sure that you're setting an agenda for your meetings. If that's one of the ways you're increasing communication, that's going to help you communicate more effectively. One of the big things, two of the big things that I like about a meeting agenda, or put on a meeting agenda, I should say. The first one is to start with gratitude and appreciation. That means not just, hey, you guys did a great job this week, but John, when you completed that project earlier than the deadline, that was awesome because that saved our client $50,000, right? So I'm using my favorite method of feedback, which is SBI, situation, behavior, impact. I'm telling John that when he did something, what his behavior was and what the impact was of it. And so I'm not just saying, great job, John. I'm saying, here's what you did, here's when you did it, and here's how it impacted everybody, right? So starting your meetings with gratitude or appreciation focused in that manner is going to start your team wanting to do those things for you, right? So now John was praised. Sally, Betty, Joe, all the other people on your team are like, John got praised because he did this and this was the impact. If I do something in my area of expertise and it has a good impact, I'm going to hear about that too. And you're going to get a lot of flies with your honey. So starting with gratitude also helps your team, appreciate each other, right? It's not just you, the leader, telling them what you appreciate about them, but it's them also saying, my colleague so-and-so was great. She helped me. She stepped in to help me meet this client when I was sick, and it kept the project on the right track, again, using SBI. And the more you use SBI feedback, they will start to realize that that's a great way for them to also show that kind of feedback. So if you've never started with gratitude and appreciation, it might be slow going and you may have to start it, but it should help. It also helps focus kind of the mindset going into a meeting where we're going to have a great meeting because there's fun things we talk about. And I hear good things that are happening and we talk about success, right? Starting it off on the right foot is really what gets us there. Now, the other thing I use on agendas that I really like is making sure that the end of the meeting ends with action items, and you can put those on a list anytime during the meeting. Action items that describe who, what, and when. So who's doing something, what they're doing, and when it's due. And then those become an agenda item for the next time, reviewing the action items. So make sure that you're not just having a meeting for the sake of a meeting, that you're actually trying to get some things done in that meeting. Now, the third common mistake new leaders make is neglecting to seek feedback. So you're a new leader, you don't want to go to your team and say, hey, team, what am I doing well and not so well, right? You don't want to call any attention to your weaknesses if you're new. And that's common, and that's our natural nature. And so when you don't seek feedback, you're not able to make adjustments. You don't know that because you speak really quickly, the team is missing half your conversation during the meeting and they have no idea what happened by the time they're done, right? You don't know that not meeting with these certain people to figure out the strategy for this project is detrimental to making the project move forward, right? So you need to actively seek feedback from your team And I would say even from your manager, and potentially if you have anybody that is kind of the same level as you that's doing similar things with a different team, it's great to have a conversation with them to figure out what are their best practices, what's going well for them, and you share yours as well. So make sure that seeking feedback is high on your list for when you're a new leader, and actually anytime you're a leader. And I would say do it in the SBI feedback method, right? If somebody asks you for feedback, give it in the same manner. What's the situation, behavior, and the impact of it? And then you are more likely to get that kind of feedback back, which is more useful for you to figure out what your behavior was and what the impact was. And I would suggest if somebody says to you, no, I think you're doing a great job, then you ask them, what am I specifically doing that you've noticed that attributes to that success, right? Ask them for the SBI if they're not giving it to you that way. Same thing if somebody says, great job, could you tell me a little bit more about what you think went well, right? So those are the 3 most common mistakes I see new leaders making and some ways to avoid them. All right, the next question that came in was, what techniques can I use to manage my time more effectively as a leader? So we talked about delegating quite a bit. So I would say delegate when you can. That is also going to help your team feel valued because you are trusting them to do things. Prioritize your tasks. If you're not familiar with the Eisenhower matrix, I think that's a great tool. I have some resources on that. And also time blocking can be really helpful. So if you know that you have a particular task and you want to get a chunk of it done, if you block an hour of your calendar to work on that, you're more likely to have focused time there. And one of my hot tips for that time blocking is to turn off your notifications. So I believe the last time I checked the statistics, it's something like 64 notifications an hour for the common person between their email, their apps on their phone, everything. So if you shut off your notifications, you are more likely to not get interrupted, and your work is less likely to have mistakes because interruptions lead you to make more mistakes without even you knowing it. And then the third thing I would say is set aside some time for planning. If you take time for planning, you almost give yourself 3 times more time to actually implement things. So if you have 4 hours to do some sort of leadership task, you spend 1 hour planning what that's going to look like. Those 3 hours that you have remaining are going to be awesome. You're going to be able to implement, get feedback, do everything you need to do, and you won't have to say, oh, what comes next, because you've already planned that. So really think about setting aside time for planning. Some people do that on like a Friday afternoon. They set aside a time and say, okay, next week is going to look like this. And they plan out what they're going to do during the week, look at their meetings coming ahead, figure out what they're going to need to do. Some people do that Monday morning, so they plan out their week from there. Others do it at different times of the week. And I think any of those are great as long as you pick something and you're consistent with it. All right, last question is, how do I maintain my own well-being while supporting my team? So you're setting the tone for your team as a leader, and what you do impacts the culture of the team. If you can set boundaries for yourself, your team is going to see that, and they're going to do the same thing, and you're going to end up with a really nice, balanced work life, both you and your team. So set boundaries to make sure you have time for your own personal life versus your professional life. What are your working hours? What are your non-working hours? What does your communication outside work hours look like? Is there going to be any communication outside of work hours? If your work hours are different from somebody else's work hours, what's the expectation of when you send something versus when they send something and the response time? Right? So really start to set those boundaries, set those expectations. One of the big things here is, like, if you're on a remote team and you are on different time zones, sometimes that there could be a really big time period where you're not overlapping in work. And so what's the expectation then? Is it send me a message, I'll get back to you when I'm next on my working hours? Or am I responding to you when you're working and I'm not supposed to be, right? So set the tone for your team when you do that. And in particular, if you're taking time off, make sure your time off is really time off, because you don't want your team to think that their time off should be time they're also working, because it's time off. All right. Delegating, again, is a great way to maintain your own well-being. Make sure you're trusting your team to handle responsibilities that you need them to. And then seek support if you are having trouble with your own well-being while supporting your team. Look for a mentor or some peer leaders or a professional network where you can talk about some of the things you're going through and see if you can get some advice or just be able to vent, something like that, so that you can feel like you're supported while you're supporting your team.
Thanks for joining me for this mini-sode. If we're not already connected on LinkedIn, you can find me there, sharing practical tips and insights on all things leadership. And don't forget to grab the free resource on my website, latourleadershipacademy.com, and get more great tips directly in your inbox. Have a great rest of your day and see you back here soon.